Friends, thanks for joining us on episode 187 of the Coffee Roaster Warm-Up Sessions podcast. This is a killer episode as we're joined by Chris Deferio, who has over 2 decades of experience in the coffee industry. He's a 3 times latte art champion and has done so much for the coffee industry through his podcast and consulting services over at Keys to the Shop. He has been helping managers and coffee business owners build a sustainable, thriving businesses, which is so needed in the coffee industry. In this episode, we're talking about how to get more people into your cafe, but also how to serve them better and eventually making more money and running sustainable businesses that are not failing or struggling. This is an incredible episode with so much value that I really enjoyed recording and then editing and listening to it over and over again. Hopefully you enjoyed this as much as I did. Let's get into this. Well, we're not going to break any traditions here. We're still going to pour some Batchy in the beginning of the episode. Chris, what have you been drinking?
Right now, it is a Columbia from Quill's Coffee here in Louisville.
Nice.
They call it Black Condor. So it's just not anything like a specific farm. It's various smallholder farms, but it's really, I've been loving like a lot of washed Columbias lately, honestly. I've been using actually the coffee sock cloth filter for the last 3 weeks or so, and it's great. I love it.
Nice.
Is that in a V60 as well? Or a different
No, actually it's just the big old
it's just the
mitten. Whatever it is.
What's kind of your ideal cup of coffee?
Oh man.
Are you more of a let me give you some more parameters. What origin is your go-to? Maybe are you with milk-based drinks or are you more of a drip filter coffee? Give us a little bit of a rundown, insight of what Chris drinks.
Oh man. Well, I don't drink a whole lot of milk these days. In coffee, I used to really love macchiatos and the like, and I kind of cut my teeth on macchiatos when I first got into it, but I tend to be very traditional, mid to kind of developed. I wouldn't even say dark. Maybe for some professionals it's dark. For me it's just you've got that really unctuous, smooth, and I'm not afraid to use the word smooth. People know what that means, okay? Yeah. Bold and smooth coffee. No, it's that fudgy, a little bit of that really reduced red fruit, cherry, like chocolate cherry flavor in coffee is really fun to me. Mm-hmm. Florals that don't taste soapy. I'm not the biggest fan of tasting black tea and bergamot in my coffee, but there are some Ethiopians and others that I do appreciate that are more balanced. But so if it's drip coffee or pour overs, I'm usually just loving something like a washed Guatemalan, washed Colombia. Yeah. There's been some Papua New Guineas that are produced around every now and again that I love. And espresso wise, I have right now in my freezer a bag of Panther Coffee's East Coast Espresso that I dose out of the bag frozen, and it's just that super traditional fudgy espresso that I love. I just brew that on a flare, an old school flare.
Nice. I was just going to ask you, how are you brewing coffee at home? So flare for espresso. Mm-hmm. Are you brewing much filter coffee or batch brew at home?
It's a lot. It's pour over using the cloth filter, and that's it.
Sick. That's awesome. Do you feel like you brew coffee more at home, or do you go to cafes?
It's funny. These days, my son's 11. And I have my home office, I have the podcast, I have client calls. I don't leave my house very much unless I'm traveling to a client or going to Coffee Fest, but I do like to get out to a cafe, but I'm usually buying espresso when I go to a cafe. Yeah. Unfortunately, with drip coffee, cafes it's not very fresh tasting, even if it was brewed fresh, because the implements they use to store it and brew it are not actually well maintained. There's a little bit of that taint on there, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. We just recently, the last episode we did was on coffee storage and the impact of how you store coffee. Mark did a little experiment and did a YouTube video on it, and just different methods of storing, just everything from like a Ziploc bag to staying in the valved bag or using one of the containers and the impact of that. And then we were also talking about how that could change how you store coffee in a cafe as well, not only at home. So yeah, storage 100% plays a significant role to even producing a good batch brew, because I feel like people think batch brew is such an easy way to brew coffee and they overlook a lot of the other logistics before they actually brew the coffee, which, coffee storage is the main one.
Yeah, it's a trade-off, isn't it? Because even if you have a busy cafe and you brew 3 liters of batch brew coffee, you still have to really, the between batch protocol that you do for roasting, do that for batch brewing. You have to clean, and people just don't. They're like, nobody has time for that. I'm just going to, sometimes they just brew in there and right after another batch because it's the same coffee. Mm-hmm. It's ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of how people worry about airplane coffee, They're like, well, it might be good coffee on Alaska Airline now, but what do they do with the carafes? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a taste of history, guys.
Yeah, you get more complexity.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's fun. Speaking of washed Guatemalans, that's kind of what we're drinking right here. This is like a staple washed Guatemalan that we have year round. We source from we've been sourcing this coffee from the same producer for the last 4 years. It just crushes and cranks, and it's like the go-to drip, the go-to espresso, the go-to everything. Yeah. Super big, just like crowd pleaser, but also not like boring. Yeah.
Well, which is wild that I had no idea we were going to brew this on the podcast this morning. I brewed it twice at home on the Dwell, So yeah, solid coffee. Absolutely love it.
Well, Chris, give us a little bit of a in a nutshell before we get into kind of some of the stuff that you're doing right now. In a nutshell, kind of your progression from latte art championships, getting into that, being a competitor, and then moving on to doing a lot of consulting work, which is interesting because I think maybe I could be wrong. It's kind of an untraditional route that you've taken. It feels like every time you hear a competitor crush or win, it's usually like they're moving on to like starting a cafe or something around that realm, not like, hey, I'm going to become a coffee consultant. Or maybe I'm wrong and I don't live in that world, so I don't know. But yeah.
No, I hear you. I mean, the quick and dirty here is, this is my 25th year in coffee, and it, from barista to, oh my gosh, there's competitions. I want to participate because that legitimizes my life choice of doing coffee. And you win an award. Like I won my first competition I entered in DC in 2004. And it was a harrowing experience. And I repeated that when within a 3 or 4 year span, a couple of times got second. Different competition altogether back then. It was a different structure. I did do a lot of judging and retired from judging just recently after about 20 years of pretty consistent participation as a head judge. And during that time, though, I was working in coffee shops and managing and training wholesale accounts, training baristas and managers and managing managers. So you get your hands dirty and you get to build with people from the ground up in small to mid-sized coffee shops. But then you go to these trade shows and you meet all these other people. It brings a breath of life that says, you're isolated in your little area. So now you get to see everyone's doing this work and they're making coffee better. Mm-hmm. And early on, when I started to get a big head about competition, I got 4th place in the U.S. Barista Championships in 2007, around there. Everything after that was just like I bombed because my focus was diverted. I got married. I just really couldn't, justify making my wife like a coffee widow, and as the term was bandied about then, right? But I just kind of went back into working in coffee shops. But I did think, okay, I'm going to do consulting. I mean, this is what you do. I got to go and tell people what to do because I feel very confident. But I just didn't know enough. I wasn't mature enough. Just because you win a competition and you've got awards is not enough. But the thing is people are desperate for good information, and championships they're kind of a surrogate for, knowledge and wisdom. Somehow you wouldn't have gotten this award unless you were really good at what you do, and that's what we need. So we're going to hire you. And everyone gets burned. And so I'm glad I disappeared for a while and continued to work in the industry and just got my lumps. I tell people I was the manager that I've made someone cry. I've told people have told me that I'm the one that, I'm the best manager they've had. So it runs the gamut, right? Yeah. You can imagine over decades. So I was basically moving into consulting because the coffee shop world is a complex world of a lot of inputs, a lot of things need to work together. And for me, it felt like that's the thing that got me into the coffee house scene to begin with. And so if I believe in the power of a well-executed coffee experience in a coffee shop, then I believe it would be great to help people do that more often. And I think that in turn helps facilitate the success of the whole industry. So, I just kind of took the opportunities where I could and kind of was pretty decisive. I just didn't look back, and I started the podcast 8 years ago, and it wasn't to try to make it into consulting again, but it became evident that I said, I think I know enough now to do some good for people who are asking for help through the podcast. And so I kind of said yes. It took me a while to promote the services because I didn't really want to promote it that much, but here we are 8 years later, and this is what I do full time now. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, totally. Speaking of the podcast, I feel like for me personally, the podcast has been an avenue where I feel like you've consulted me in, whether it's opening cafes or helping manage staff or all of cafe related, especially specifically cafe related things. I started listening to Keys to the Shop back in 2017. I believe it was, Keys to the Shop was the first coffee podcast I regularly listened to. And then I believe it was Map It Forward with Lee, and then just the coffee podcast were my top three. That's before I even knew other folks like Cat and Cloud. The podcast world is fairly big nowadays. So thinking back to 2017, it was your voice that I would bring to staff meetings and be like, guys, we need to take this seriously. This is a big deal. I'm not the only one that actually thinks this way. This is someone you can trust if you don't trust me. So I think it's a great resource, brings a lot of value to cafe managers, coffee shop owners, or in general. I think listening into it also as a barista helped me work with other managers and other owners. So I think it goes both ways. And especially I think for us, if there's a lot of baristas or even home baristas listening to this episode with you, what I hope they see and hear is that your podcast also brings value to folks who are not on the, ownership, management, or leadership side, but the shift break episodes are clutch, literally on a shift break. I literally did that on my lunch break, 30 minutes. I had a 15-minute listening to the episode, eat my lunch, get back into it, and think about it while you're crushing a rush. A lot of the times crushing a rush was very quote unquote monotonous in a high volume cafe. So I'm standing there pulling shots, but what's going through my mind is some of the things that you shared on that podcast. So thank you.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Wow.
I'm curious, what pushed you to start the podcast? I know this episode isn't about the podcast, but curious, what pushed you to start recording podcasts back in 2017?
Sure. I was somebody who I listened to the podcasts that were around, and at the time the number one podcast, and maybe I think besides the coffee podcast, and shout out to Jesse Hartman, and cool dude, was Cat and Cloud.
Yep.
They had started that before, and it was really fun, and it was a coffee culture podcast really at the time. I think they are right now a lot more, they will be their culture still, but internal cafe culture now that they've been running Cat and Cloud as a retail and experience, and it's wonderful. But at the time, when I was a manager and I had managers under me, what I was doing was I was going to select leadership podcasts and management podcasts, reading Peter Drucker books and The Effective Executive, and looking into where I can get these supplemental pieces of information that, in my mind would tie over into coffee nicely, right? Mm-hmm. But the thought was, well, why can't we just have a coffee shop version of this so I don't have to go around and collect it? And that's what it was. That was the desire. I wanted a creative outlet too. I saw it as an opportunity. I saw it as a potential for some kind of get it going and get some kind of an income through sponsorships. But it was not, I didn't really think any of that would really happen the way that it turned out. And mostly it's through consulting. But it was really just about getting something into the ecosystem of coffee that could focus people's attention onto, the things that really move the needle to bring sustainable success to operations in the cafe.
Nice. That's excellent. Speaking of moving the needle, this is a great segue right into what we're supposed to be talking about. So what does it, after you've consulted, you've talked with a lot of business owners, you've had some of your personal experiences, what are some of the things that you're looking out for in a coffee shop that speaks to a successful coffee operation? What are some of the metrics that you're paying attention to?
Oh, the classics, of course. You've got to have some level of adherence to labor percentages of 25 to 30% and rent that is 10% of your gross revenue per month, and cost of goods. We always recommend 17 to 21% or so for coffee, and a little bit higher for things like sandwiches and the like. But all of that, of course, is business. That's just regular business stuff, except for the coffee cost of goods is a little bit more specific and niche for coffee. But looking at the other stuff in the cafe, you want to see growth. You want to see some kind of at least 10 to 20% year over year. There might be a time where you plateau, but with a lot of places that are like 2 or 3 years old, I don't think it takes you 2 years to completely mine the depths of the potential in your town, even if you're in a small town. And if you're not growing, to me, it feels like there's something happening that prevents people from evangelizing about your brand, activating conversations, attracting people. They're not aware of you. And what I find is that coffee shops will kind of shut down when the plateau hits and not get curious about the factors that contribute to it. And the contributing factors are either you're doing a good job with what you've got, but you've got to grow into a more sort of go out there and get them mentality. And that doesn't mean, by the way, discounting everything in sight and apologizing for your prices and that kind of stuff. It just means people literally here in Louisville, Kentucky, where I live, there's coffee shops that have been around for decades. People who have lived here their whole life have no idea they're there. Mm-hmm. So we can't just hang the shingle and expect people to sort of be attracted like a magnet to this place. So that's what I mean by go out in their community and get them. But it's also maybe a little bit more on the nose here with consulting, identifying things that when you're in the midst of the work, you can't see are negative contributing factors like quality hiccups or service fails or, the functionality of the cafe itself for the customer's enjoyment, or less than enthusiastic staff because there's an inconsistency in communication. Sometimes we're not paid on time. And there's all these things that can coalesce into this big, I don't know why we're not getting more business question. And that to me feels like the thing we need to be focusing on right now, rather than how many more cafes can we open up. Yeah. I think that's at the heart of what I'm doing is, yes, there's opportunity to grow in size, but if we're not growing in depth and knowledge and self-knowledge around the things that are actually building our reputation with the community, then you're just going to be you're expanding into more dysfunction. And that's what we see happen a lot in these types of businesses, where you might be doing everything as the owner. You're managing, you're running to get milk, you're doing the quarterly taxes, you're just doing all the stuff. And it's hard to get perspective, hard to get clarity. And so there needs to be some kind of an opportunity to break through to clarity where it kind of shakes you and say, I can't even believe that we haven't been serving espresso that tastes good for months. And I just thought that it was fine. But it turns out the customers just didn't like it as much. And so they didn't come back. They didn't complain, they just didn't come back. So it's little stuff like that we identify, but it's not just the bad stuff. And I'll end here because I'm being a little long-winded, but it's just not the bad stuff, like the corrosive elements that naturally happen in a business. It's also, if we're wasting our time with things that don't move the needle, then we're not giving energy to things that are really resonating with customers. If customers love, you mentioned the Guatemala, it's a crowd pleaser. And when we hear the word crowd pleaser, we're like, ew, but what about the cool coffee?
Yep.
Right? So why are we not leaning into the stuff that's showing positive results? Yep. And, we're not paying attention to it too much because we're just buried, or we're trying to impress people that don't support our businesses, peers in our industry. So there's some of that contributes to the success of a coffee shop, is the metrics, and they focus on a holistic view of inputs of, like, how is your place, your product, and your people, how are they being cared for in an actual, intentional, systematic way, so that you say, well, I know because we have one-on-ones regularly. In those one-on-ones, we affirm our staff on specifics that are especially specific to them. And we also coach them and bring them up as professionals, and we pay them very well as much as we can. And I could go on, but you have to prove that you're about that life rather than just talking about it. It has to be an actual system, or else it's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's a lot. So a few things that I'm hearing from you, some of the keys to a successful coffee company, one, have to do with seeing things grow, but not only through the external eyes of what growth means, like scaling multiple locations, but growing in depth, which a lot of the times is internal growth. And with that kind of foundation, then a major point would be like marketing, or quote unquote, like evangelizing what you have. Like if your roots and you've established a very good maybe system, you have a very good team, and you're growing in depth, then growing in width through evangelism, and like through just telling people the idea like, hey, we have something to offer and we believe you would enjoy that, would be the next step. And then finally taking feedback and continually using that feedback to put back into the system for more depth, so that you can grow. I was going to say grow in width, but you can expand. If that would be a better way.
You can expand. Yeah, well put.
I'm like excited just hearing everything you're saying, because this is a lot of the stuff that Sergio and I will bicker around for like all the time about, like, man, if you don't solve this problem of how to get more people into your cafe, then just opening up something else, you're actually leaving that Band-Aid, that wound open, and it's just going to keep growing. And if you don't figure out how to solve that, well, you're just going to be walking around with a crutch and thinking, man, I'm making headway because now we have multiple locations, but shoot, you haven't figured out the thing that's actually going to move the needle. So that's always going to be a thorn in your flesh that you're never going to be able to fix. And at some point, you can only grow so much until that thing just becomes it's like dying by 1,000 cuts, or whatever that phrase is. But give us some. And I also like that you said that a negative experience is also working against you. And that's something that I think also I don't very hear talked about very often, because if you have a negative experience, that works just like the magnitude of that, the power that holds is the same as word of mouth. It's just in a very negative sense. And to win that over, to convert the negative word of mouth takes actually a lot of energy. So even if you just eliminate the negative word of mouths, you're already winning at exponential rate, because you don't have to put in the energy later on to reverse that negative word of mouth, if that makes sense. You talked about going out and evangelizing. As you're talking with different cafes and owners, give us some practical tips, like what can coffee shop owners do that can bring more people in that actually may not even know that they exist in their town?
So have you heard this book, Atomic Habits by James Clear? So the part of this book that really is powerful is you have to assume over time through microscopic habits consistently the identity of the person that does that habit. So you are writing every day, you become a writer. You do one push-up. Oh, yeah, I do push-ups every morning. Like maybe it's 2, but eventually the compound interest, the accrual will start to, you'll see the evidence of that. And so it's easy to get a coffee shop open technically. If you got enough money and time, you put stuff on tables and you put the open sign on, you've got a coffee shop. But living into the identity of a coffee shop owner is the next step. And practically speaking, this means forming a habit of awareness and campaigns for your business in the community in good faith, which is, in other words, saying, I'm excited about my coffee shop. I want other people to visit my coffee shop because we worked hard to bring in great coffee. We trained, we did all these things. And instead of sitting behind the counter, what I'm going to do, even I have clients do this to great success, take a circle, a mile radius within your cafe, look at where all the businesses are, and introduce yourself face to face with every office, complex, manager, owner of that place, and form real life relationships with them. And it feels like, well, I mean, can't I just do a TikTok trend? I mean, I'd like to introduce a cool new drink. And then people, that's what they're looking for. People, technically, here's the thing. People aren't looking for anything that you don't tell them to look for. So if you go out there and just meet people, you can give them tokens that say, hey, I know you have an office of like 6, 7 people. Here's a free drink on us. We're just on the street. Here's a map where we're located. Love to see you in the cafe. If people don't know you after a year or that you're there, that's your fault. It's not their fault. They're busy. So we're going to be missing each other like wallflowers at a high school dance until we go out there and just like approach them. So that's one practical thing you can do. Just keep doing that. Another thing is using social media. If you really want to use social media well, I think coffee shops love to talk about community. Well, when was the last time a coffee shop, for no other reason except they were excited about the record store or the tattoo parlor or the SPCA or whatever, they went there and they featured them and they were just like, we want to use our platform to focus on our community. We tagged them and we're doing this. Now, if you're sitting there with a spreadsheet going like, okay, I did that. Now let's see the returns roll in. Oh, sales aren't good the next day. Well, that didn't work. No, you don't do that. You just become the kind of person who, through sheer repetition, is living generously and inviting people in. That is taking the first step in hospitality is actually inviting people over.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, I think there's a weird kind of paradox for a lot of cafe owners. Like they come into starting and opening a cafe with this intention, like, classic. I'm going to, build community. I'm going to foster community. I'm going to be a space for people, that third space, talk about it so much, open up the cafe. You're like, yes, here we go. Then you start doing ops, you start doing the taxes, and then you yourself forget the third place as a cafe, operator and owner, and you don't have quote unquote time to find the third place. You're always busy. You're always doing, because you have to save money here, you have to cut there. So you're always trying to do so much. And I feel like the early stages, like if there's no focus or no look back in why you started a coffee shop and that is not the anchor to what you're doing, then you can't, like, you know what I mean? Like you were saying, like if you're not going out and telling people that you're excited about the cafe because now it doesn't feel genuine to you, then you need to kind of restart. You need to go back to the origin of why did you even get into this, you know? And one of the things for me is like, I know, like I started working in coffee at not even at like a quote unquote specialty third wave cafe, just at a mom and pop. And I had no idea about what it meant to be a barista, and I got the management job. Like my first job in coffee was a management job. And I was intimidated too. I'm like, I understand I have these skills in my past career that could apply here, but I don't even know how to pull a shot of espresso, you know? So starting from that perspective and then understanding like, okay, yes, I'm busy here, but I absolutely must make time to go to these other places and other cafes. And at that point, actually, which is a sad thing to say, but the business owner that I was talking to and working with, they were like, I want you to spend less time in other cafes because I want you to focus on this cafe. And there was always that pull, you know, like the push and pull. But then when I continued working in coffee and started actually helping other people open cafes, I've noticed like what you're saying is that practical aspect of actually engaging the community is what creates a space for community. It's the engagement, not really the four walls.
We don't trust very easily. We don't trust easily because we've been burned. I always say that people have been hurt by coffee in the past. So whenever somebody walks into your cafe, they've got baggage from that one time that barista did that one thing. And now every barista is that barista. Same thing with coffee. I hate Guatemalan coffee because the one time on a cruise I had it and you know. So we have a lot to overcome. But if we've really got to stick up our butt about, well, I didn't do that and it's not fair for them to associate. Well, that you're not going to move past that. You do have to take the initiative. The trust part is huge because if you're going to familiarize the community with your brand, just to kind of warm them up, to till the soil, right? Then the next time they hear about your brand is a step closer, and the next time to that. And pretty soon, they're hearing about your brand from somebody that they actually trust, a close friend or a family member. And then they come in and they're like, why haven't I ever come here?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's excellent. I want to address maybe like an objection that maybe somebody is having as they're listening to this, which I think you addressed it a little earlier here in this episode is, man, I'm in a small town, or maybe not small town, but hey, I've tapped out my entire area, or my city, my region, or whatever it is. Break that down a little bit. Like, why is that probably not the case?
Yeah. Well, okay, let's play devil's advocate and say it is the case. Let's say that you live in a one-stop sign town, and it's the case that you know everyone, they know you, they just don't come to your coffee shop. Well, at a certain point, there may not be anything that you can do, right? You have to, but I think we get to that assumption too quickly. So if, for instance, we want to be sure and diagnose, you have to, I'm not going to change the grind on the espresso grinder unless I know something is wrong with the espresso and I've tasted it myself and I've seen it. Otherwise, I'm just doing it because I'm fidgeting. So with the business, I will say, what is it that customers come in for? They come in for a product. They come in for an experience, secondarily, and they want it to be repeated every single time. They want to enjoy it. So when was the last time that I tasted my own menu? When was the last time I actually trained the barista past the onboarding phase, which I was really relieved to be over with? And I just like, man, okay, they should be good now because they've got the manual. And when was the last time I looked to see that every barista behind the bar was busy on their phones and they only looked up when the customer actually arrived at the counter? So there's a lot of little things that we're not aware of that we might just like write off. It can't be that. I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but it is. It is. Those things, it's a big deal because in the customer, their only focus is the experience they're having. To you, it's not a big deal because you've got bigger issues that are looming in your head. So if you're not viewing it from their perspective, then you're not really appreciating just how much force of expectation they're pushing down on this coffee puck of a coffee experience that they're having. Just like espresso, if it's uneven, it's going to blast through one side. It's going to be uneven extraction, but you might not be able to tell by looking at it. You have to actually get in there and experience the thing. So that's what I would say is, be sure. If you are sure and you're like, yeah, everyone's making amazing coffee drinks, great service every single time, we're way on top of all that, we're just a really small town, then you've got to start thinking about whether or not you have too much on your menu. You're not, maybe you're not charging enough. Perhaps this model of business that you chose to engage in is a mismatch for the market that you chose to open in. That always is a thing as well.
That's great. That's excellent. I'm glad you touched up on those things. Even though that is not the answer that I was expecting, but that was a really good answer though. And I think something maybe worth adding is that if you could get like, does everybody in your area, wherever you are, does everybody know that you exist? And if not everybody knows that you exist, then there's a potential that there's somebody in that spot, in that part of your small population that doesn't know you exist, could be somebody that could become a regular in your space. And simply just because they just don't know that you exist is a big problem, let alone like fixing all the, the menu, the drinks, and making sure everything's is polished. Sergey sometimes will tell me these crazy things from, his time in cafes where it's like the cafe's been around for years and somebody walks by from the neighborhood and is like, I didn't know you existed. And I'm like, wait, you're telling me the guy lives up the street and doesn't know that you like that, but which should be hopeful, for somebody listening, is that, that could just be the difference there. It's just like, that's a fixable thing. And it's not rocket science too. It's not like, oh, you got to change up your entire business model. Just like, I don't know, tell more people that don't know you exist. I don't know.
And
well, increasingly with algorithms, people aren't going to be fed your coffee shop in their feed, that it's not going to come to them, except they're just going to be looking at like pocket knives and vacation rental properties. And that's pretty much it, and so that is another vote in favor of, look, you can't trust social media anymore for this kind of thing. That's for people that already know you in a lot of ways. So well said, Mark. I think that, if you think about it from a awareness perspective, maybe it's all about every year we push ourselves to just introduce ourselves to more and more people. But the thing is, you got me thinking that people, like I said, they're not looking for something new unless they're really dissatisfied with something they have. And for the most part, we're really good at normalizing dysfunction. Yeah. So if you use a trash can as a knockbox long enough, you're gonna give it a name. It's gonna be your mascot in the cafe, and you don't want to get rid of it. People are this way too. With, hey, this coffee shop, I go there every day. I propose to my wife there, and sometimes the baristas are rude and the bathroom smells, but it's my coffee shop. Now they're not looking for a new coffee shop, but they don't know it yet. But they would really appreciate a new one. So you've got to be like, hey, just so I'm good. But then again, just so well, maybe I will. And it starts like that.
I think, or do you think then a lot of owners are distracted by this idea of creating the next viral TikTok versus taking marketing in a very practical step, in a practical application, especially considering like our current economic situation, where there's so much freaking out, whether that's, the C market, coffee prices going up, labor going up, utilities and everything, eggs are, who knows how expensive now, and all of that, and freaking out about those things, and then focusing on simply making, I hope I go viral on TikTok, rather than saying like, okay, well, who are the people that surround me?
It's so funny. Yesterday I was talking with a client about this, trends and TikTok trends, adoption of trends like this, and making that the MO of your business has short-term gains, and you can get famous, you can get viral, and it's just not going to make long-term success. Now, if you want to think only a month ahead to say, well, what were we going to do for Easter? Well, this thing I saw on TikTok that's really fun, and it turns your mouth, pastel colors or something stupid. And all of a sudden you're known. Well, known by who? Right? When Groupon was around, when it still is maybe, I don't know, but I hated it. The bargain hunters were there. They're not the customer base that I wanted to attract, because they would never come in otherwise unless I was giving away product at a cost that was damaging to me. TikTok seekers of trends are not the people who actually support your business. So you can't make your coffee shop an Airbnb for other people's ideas, right? You have to actually create your own world. Be in the world making business. This is our seasonal menu. This is our flavor combinations that represent a sense of place. We've listened to our customers, and we love to have this washed Guatemalan on the menu all the time because y'all love it and we love you. And if there's a TikTok thing that aligns with previously established values and goals of your business, so be it. The stars have aligned, and good for you. But you haven't done this whole like Faustian bargain where you exchange your soul for notoriety, which is like the scourge of today's, internet. So I'm pretty, I hate it. And so I think there's a lot more integrity that we can tap into that speaks more to what people want. They don't want the trendy drinks necessarily. They just want something they can count on. And novelty is a substitute and a surrogate for the fact that simple things are not dependable. And so we'd rather have inconsistent novelty than deal with the inconsistency of things that should be pretty easy to do, but we somehow refuse to do well in coffee shops. Yeah,
there's almost like a fine line between knowing or seeing trends that are happening in the industry or in the world in general, with like this grounding of understanding who your local market is and what is happening around you, like within that maybe 1 mile, radius, or even like in your county, maybe a little broader. I definitely think there's that tension there that you can't just ignore one for the other. You can't just, like Mark and I always say, like, you can't expect people to know about your cafe if the only thing you've done is put up a sandwich board. Like, there's limiting factors there. It depends on how many cars drive by, how many people walk by. So you got to do more than that. And that's where I believe, like, social media is helpful, but that's not the all in all of all marketing.
Yeah, social media done well with a sense of, hey, we're going to get to know you, you're going to get to know us. But if you just jump out on the gate and you've got all the trappings of what, you could have just prompted AI to create this coffee shop and it's what you present, then you lose yourself. There's no, what's the difference about your coffee bar?
Yeah,
I'm
glad you mentioned it's doing social media in a way where it's like, we're going to get to know you and you can get to know us. And that kind of goes down the rabbit hole of like building a good brand, or I like the way that you talked about it as, I think, building your own world. That is very much so related to like brand building. But I'm glad because, something else I do outside of coffee is I run social media and I create content for brands. And it's been decently successful. And I've seen some really awesome results, like really mind-blowing results. But again, it's like I'm glad that you made a distinction of like, hey, it's not about just like seeing a trend of like a new drink and then you're like, how do we implement this? You see Whole Foods that did that shaken brown sugar drink, all of a sudden we need to add that. It's like, maybe that's not the way to approach this, but there's a way to do social media in a way that might actually raise your awareness, might actually bring a little more traction and knowledge of your brand, but don't lose yourself in all of that as well. And be able to communicate a part of who you are to them in a way that's authentic to you and genuine, and that's not cookie cutter. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to Coffee Fest in New York in about 4 days now. Every time, this is a place where people will go for answers. They go because they're like, we're going to start a coffee shop, or we did start a coffee shop, and we think that there's something here that we need or want. And what coffee shop owners do a lot of times is, because a lot of them, it is their first rodeo with coffee. There's not a lot of people opening coffee shops who have been longtime coffee professionals compared to new people. And it's because they already know what it's like to work in coffee. And they're like, no, thanks. But the new people, they want to alleviate the pain of not knowing as fast as possible. And, we've got a salesperson for that. And that ends up being very successful for, certain companies, but it doesn't actually, that's what I find myself doing a lot in conversations with people who do want to start coffee shops, is, well, why this, why that? Tell me more about that. What's your goal there? And just ask these questions that maybe they haven't asked themselves yet, but the answer comes out and they're like, yeah, sometimes they'll tell me, now that I'm saying it, I don't really think we want to do that. But it's the opportunity to slow down and think through something that will yield maybe a smaller cafe, maybe a smaller menu, something that's not as flashy, but it's way more effective. It's way more focused. So that's kind of the cool part about conversations and podcasts or, media of some kind that allows you to take that moment to be like, wait a second, where am I? Why am I doing this? What's the logical next step? And then, it's easier than I thought, or at least it's a little bit more simple.
And Sergi mentioned like the present economic, all the kind of like the uncertainty here. Maybe a lot of things are changing.
Yeah,
I think for a lot of coffee shop owners, probably bringing in more people through some of the ways that we've outlined in this episode would be very beneficial and could be the difference of, making up the difference of where they need to be and where they are right now. But go with me here for a second. Let's say they brought some new folks in. Their customer base increased. Maybe there's like a 10% increase of people coming into their coffee shop month over month. What's the other thing, as they're maybe right now a little stressed or panicking and thinking about all these things? What's maybe one or two things that they should double down on and focus on that would maybe bring some sense of security or at least sustainability during this weird moment right now?
Ooh, good question. Double down on. Well, I've always said it's relationships, and behind the counter, the question is, you increase 10, 20% number of people that come in the cafe. I would love to see maybe even more than that, increase ticket sizes, or just the amount of money being spent in the cafe from the existing customer base. All of these things are a measure, I think, of trust that people put in your business. So doubling down on effectively planning for success through outfitting your baristas with the right resources and training and focus. If you don't have a set of operational values that guide your business's behaviors towards people and the coffee and the space and just hospitality, then that's a great place to start. Become super intentional. Big fan of the idea of using turnover in your favor. You lose a barista, the thing is, let's replace them. But it's an opportunity to maybe not replace them. Maybe you enhance the other roles. You increase the rate you pay those folks. You professionalize the workforce, make it more lean, rearrange some stuff on the bar, make it a better production environment to do more with what you have. And if more people come in, you could handle it. I think sometimes people don't want more people to come in. They say they want it. Why aren't people coming into my cafe? But if it happened, they would just, crap their pants. Like, we're not ready for this. So that's the key, I think. Double down on the idea that there are a few things around training, hospitality, lean, professionalized teams, and a good workflow behind the bar that can actually handle the business. Customers are looking for that. If one time, before I was an operations manager at a small chain of coffee shops, I went there as a customer. I was the only person in line. It took about 20 minutes to get a Chemex. One person was working and they were closing the store by themselves. Once we started to install managers and it freed people up to start driving more revenue to the store, so the manager was managing, we had a better experience in the cafe. And then we added a second person on closing. It cost a little bit more money to do that. But what we were doing was betting on the fact that people with eyeballs can see we can't even handle their business, let alone my in-laws are in town. I want them to come to this coffee shop. There's no way. We don't have enough time. They're slow. So you have to be a little bit preemptive with these things. And you started the coffee shop betting on yourself. And so you kind of have to keep doing that. And that's what I would say. I think those are some ways that you can kind of lean in here. And you should probably raise your prices too.
Yeah, that's really good to resonate with a lot of that, especially when it comes to understanding when to be lean, but not in a way that allows you just to maintain the flow that you have, but to actually grow, So there's definitely a balance. I feel like I've worked in cafes that were definitely like we overhired, and it was well-intentioned, but we overhired for a fairly too long of a time. And then realizing that and being able to say, oh, why did we do that? Where were the challenges that we thought that just bringing an extra person on the floor, that they could be solved in a much different way? Like you said, whether that's bar flow or whether that's it could literally be adjusting a fridge 4 inches to the left, and then all of a sudden you can open that door easier and you can, do things much quicker. And now you can take an order, and now you can actually do that filter, and you can pull the shot of espresso. Wow. And you thought you needed 2 people behind the bar, So equipping is definitely and not only equipping the bar with more labor, but equipping the bar with more skill and confidence. And I find that, one, from a guest perspective, I remember being fascinated with one barista back in Jacksonville at Bold Bean. I'm going to give them a shout out because they deserve it. There was one barista that I would just literally, and this may sound kind of creepy, but I would go and just watch them work. Not because I wanted more coffee, but the elegance behind the bar, the composure behind the bar intelligence, just knowing it almost looked like, I know this is cheesy, but it almost looked like a literal dance. And I loved watching it, And I think that comes from of course, there's a personality behind that, but there's also, as a manager, your responsibility is to equip people to be that confident, to perform duties and responsibilities without any point of friction, And so, I totally agree with you. That's very valuable insight, and I've experienced that myself.
Great example. And we used to call it the dance of the barista. I have a VHS tape from Bellissimo back in the day that was they used the dance of the barista to describe what you're talking about. And I think David Schomer called it the baristas in Italy are graceful cats behind the bar or something like that. Love David. So the idea here, though, that you're talking about is interesting because you come across a lot of people who keep on. We have an episode called "Bottling Your Best Barista," And the business talks to you. It's a conversational thing. The business lets you know what it needs, and often it's in the form of what the baristas are doing. Hey, I love that one barista. Oh, it's my favorite barista. But we don't go so far as to say, well, what is it about what they do that is speaking to you that says the next person you hire might be a little bit more like that person?
Yep.
But we end up hiring the exact same kind of people, or we say we hire. Yeah, you can hire for potential, but you actually should hire for assets that people already do have, right? So we end up limiting ourselves because we're not listening to what the business is telling us. Hey, that's the kind of thing that you should really set a new bar, a new standard for hiring and training, and everyone growing is how you grow.
Chris, that was absolutely a killer hour of lots of value, and I know.
Oh wow!
And yeah, I think I literally think if somebody listened to this and implemented some of these things, that they would see, like what you said in the beginning, like stuff that actually moves the needle. And I'm pumped about that, and I hope people do listen to this episode and share it with other coffee business owners, because it's just so much good practical stuff. I'm pumped. Any parting words, any things that you'd want to add to our conversation as we land the plane here? Any thoughts?
Well, thank you, first of all. It's great. And I think the final thought is basically stay in conversation with your business and your people, your community, and give yourself time to reflect on these things, not just the things that you can improve, the things that are going well, the things that you've accomplished. If you look at all the bad stuff, you're probably going to attract more bad stuff. That not always. I want to be woo-woo about it, but you give yourself grace, but you also need to make decisions and grow. And part of that is going to mean that you have to let go of that version of you that was like year 1, year 2 of entrepreneur, the scrappy entrepreneur, right? And it's okay. That's part of it. Letting go of that and like saying yes to something, the next level of the version of you that the business needs now, installing people that you can then raise up to help you run that business. So it's a very communal experience, and it takes time. And I'm hopeful in the light of all of the mega chain drive-through only stuff that's popping up all over the place. I think that it's another opportunity for us in coffee shops to showcase a kind of transcendent value that only a coffee shop can do. And it starts with a lot of the things that we talked about here. So, that's kind of like my final
Thank
word.
Thank you, Chris. It's just such an honor talking to you and seeing you again. I can't wait to see you in person at possibly Coffee Fest. Who knows which one, but can't wait. Are you going to be in Portland?
Oh yeah, I'm at all the shows, giving talks and interviewing presenters, and I've got a little booth going on, so that'll be fun. It's going to be a good year, and if anyone wants to reach out, I'm always happy to answer emails or questions over email and that kind of thing. The show, we've had a lot of episodes, but probably more topics that we can cover at this point. So if anyone has suggestions or questions, they might turn into an episode, but maybe we're just going to have a conversation. And
last one thing,
that'd be fun,
Chris,
too.
How can people get a hold of you?
Sure. Email is chris@keystotheshop.com. So it's regular spelling, CHRIS, @keystotheshop. And then it's just @keystotheshop everywhere else on Instagram and the website and YouTube as well. So yeah, look up, DM, follow, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And I hope to be able to meet a lot of you.
Groovy. Well, folks, thanks for joining us on another episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm Up Sessions podcast. And remember, as we always say, reflect what's good.